we highly recommend it, is doing a yearly performance evaluation. And that's like going to the dentist when you don't have anything wrong with your teeth. You're just getting a checkup.
That Triathlon Show 114. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and on today's episode I talk with Nate Koch from Endurance Rehab about injury prevention and recovery. Nate is a very experienced physical therapist, and in particular he knows triathlon and endurance sports inside and out. He is the one who wrote the 2 chapters on injury prevention and recovery in the book Triathlon Science that I keep referencing time and time again here on this podcast. And a lot of the authors of the different chapters in that book have actually been guests on this show already. And I keep ticking them off, it seems. Nate founded Endurance Rehab in Arizona back in 2003. And the clinic have been nationally recognized for their work with everyday recreational athletes, as well as professional cyclists, triathletes, and all sorts of other athletes as well, many times since. And Nate is he's a contributor to magazines like Lava Magazine and Triathlete Magazine, and also works as a consultant for the Trek Segafredo professional cycling team. Before we go into the interview, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration. Andy Blow, who is the founder, recently wrote a great blog post on whether your hydration strategy needs to change as you get older. And I'll link to that blog post in the episode description and in the show notes. But in a nutshell, there are 3 factors that suggest that older athletes, they need to be a bit more diligent with hydration. The margins for error are reduced, and your risk of dehydration increases because you have less water on board to start with, and you tend to lose more water through your urine, and also your sensation of thirst is actually diminished when you age. So again, all of these contribute to a greater risk of dehydration. And all That Triathlon Show listeners can, of course, as usual, get their first box or tube of Precision Hydration electrolyte product for free on precisionhydration.com when you use the discount code That Triathlon Show, all one word, all caps. This episode is also sponsored by Triathlon Corner, the triathlon webshop that you can find on triathlon-corner.store. Whether you're looking for running shoes, power meters, bike computers, a new wetsuit, anything that you want in terms of gear, apparel, equipment, they have it in their webshop. And you can get it for 10% off when you use the discount code That Triathlon Show, all one word, all caps. Again, that's triathlon-corner.store. And if you're in Helsinki, they have their indoor bike studio, their brick and mortar store as well. So check those out. And if you ask, I'm sure that discount code will apply in the brick and mortar store as well. All right, so let's go right ahead and meet Nate Koch from Endurance Rehab. Today's guest on That Triathlon Show is Nate Koch from Endurance Rehab. Nate, welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned in our pre-interview chat, I'm sitting here with a bag of ice on my knee, still rehabbing that frustrating injury. And I guess that's a good segue to getting into it and start by discussing what are the most common injuries that triathletes tend to get.
Well, first off, we typically see a lot of knee pain, like what you're experiencing. That's one of the more common things we'll see. It can be related to patellofemoral pain or patellofemoral tracking issue, which can be kind of pain around the kneecap. It could be a more lateral pain on the outside of the knee, which typically is an IT band syndrome. And in worst case scenarios, sometimes we'll get kind of an overuse or degenerative cartilage tear in the knee. That's a little less common, happens more a bit in the the 40 plus age group. And then, of course, we also, as we move down, we will have some plantar fasciitis is pretty common, Achilles tendonitis or tendinopathy, low back pain, sciatica, hip impingement. Those are all probably the top injuries that afflict the triathletes.
And we should obviously try to do some sort of injury prevention. Do you know, by the way, off the top of your head, some sort of statistics on how many triathletes get injured percentage-wise?
I don't have the most recent epidemiological study in front of me. They do have some studies that will tell you the exact percentages, but every injury is a little bit different. It's probably about around 20%. But I would say most triathletes will have an injury at some point in their career.
And that's 20% of triathletes will get injured in a year.
In 1 year, yes. So that doesn't mean you in particular. If you're a triathlete that's going to compete, let's say over a career of 5 to 10 years, it's pretty much guaranteed you're going to have an injury at some point in that career. That's relatively common, and that's honestly that keeps us guys like me really busy. The ways you can prevent that, the first thing that we do this for some of the coaches now, and we highly recommend it, is doing a yearly performance evaluation, and that's like going to the dentist when you don't have anything wrong with your teeth. You're just getting a checkup. It's very similar to that, or similar to taking your car in when there's nothing wrong, getting it checked. And doing a full body assessment, going through flexibility, mobility, strength, going through your injury history, and trying to find things that might kind of crop up or present as a problem as you increase your training and your intensity and your volume. And that's the best injury prevention thing that you can do. Outside of that, then of course there's addressing some of the issues that you find. So whether that's some people that's more related to mobility, lack of mobility, or excessive mobility. In other cases, it's more related to weakness or a posture, like someone that maybe sits all day for their work, and then they decide to train at the end of the day and do a high intensity workout after sitting at a computer for 8 hours a day. So there are a number of factors that go into it. It can be quite different between individuals.
When you mentioned strength, flexibility, and mobility there, do you see that some or one of them is the most commonly lacking in the triathletes, or are they fairly evenly distributed?
I would say probably, if I had to say one, it really honestly depends. It's very individual between people. But if I had to, be pinned down to one thing, I would say it's related to, would be a weakness, multiplanar weakness. So meaning for swimming, for cycling, for running, we tend to work in one plane of motion, which is called the sagittal plane of motion, and we don't work in doing anything lateral or rotational. So missing those movements, those types of strength training, it tends to be pretty weak in triathletes. And so that would, if I had to say one thing to work on, it would be multiplanar, multi-directional strengthening.
So would that be something like your dynamic core exercises, where you work the different sides differently, like your birds and the dogs and the entire zoo? I do a poor job explaining what I mean, but I hope that you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Any movement that has some resistance, where you're moving laterally or you're rotating, a Russian twist on a medicine ball, something like that, side steps, monster walks, those type of things. I mean, in the wintertime, this time of year, Nordic skiing, skate skiing is a great way to cross train if you have snow wherever you live. That's a great cross training exercise that can build different muscles, and it'll help certainly help your triathlon training.
Brilliant. So let's hope that by now most listeners are convinced that they need to go and get that individual checkup. But in addition to that, are there some I guess, injury prevention methods that any triathlete usually would benefit from doing and from adding to their program?
Yes, I mean, for sure, the first thing is a proper warm up. And so, one thing that we'll instruct our triathletes on, cyclists, runners, as well as a proper warm up, which would include dynamic mobility exercises, or movement prep, some people call it. So it's stretching with movement. It's not holding the stretch. It's trying to prepare the body for the workout. It's most important before.
Can you give 3 or 4 examples maybe of those movements, and then people can just go and look them up on YouTube to get some idea of what we're talking about here?
Sure. So you could do some to start off with, like we call laying on your back, with maybe a leg crossover where you're crossing one leg over your body and reaching as high as you can, and then going to the opposite side and repeating back and forth, not holding a stretch, but loosening low back and hamstrings. The next thing you can move into is maybe just even skipping, or high knees, or hip openers, or walking lunges. Those type of movements to prepare your legs, your joints and your muscles and tendons for whatever movement you're going to do. And it's really critical before you do a more intense workout. If you're going to hit the track and do a track workout, it would be even more critical to have a proper warm up. And then just as critical as a cool down, and doing some passive stretching or static stretching where you're holding the stretches a bit more, where you're re-lengthening those muscles. In cycling, that's pretty critical after being in one position, a flexed position like that for long periods of time. It's important to do the opposite movements to open up the hips, open up your spine. And it even becomes more important if you're at a job sitting all day. So you're sitting all day and then you do a long bike workout. You're sitting a lot in a lot of flexion, contracted position, postural position, that you need to open things up a little bit. So those are pretty important. The proper warm up, proper cool down, and of course rest is important, just as important. Sleep is important. And there's more and more studies coming out that sleep could be potentially the most important thing for recovery and injury prevention.
Yeah, sleep's very interesting. We had an episode on that back in episode 52, so listeners can go and have a look at that. And yeah, totally agree that that's super important for injury prevention. Before we move on to recovering from injury, is there anything else that we should mention on the injury prevention side of things? Any modalities or other things that listeners should hear that they might benefit from for injury prevention?
Yeah, well, there's always the debate there's frequent debate on massage versus like a Normatec type compression boots, compression socks, and ice baths. The research is hit and miss on all those. The research is not consistent on any of those for recovery. But we coach our athletes on, what feels good, what you think helps you recover better. You should definitely try those things, because in some athletes, a compression boot or a compression sock feels great and helps them recover, and others it does nothing. And so since the science doesn't give us for sure 100%, this will definitely help you recover, then it's worth experimenting a little bit and paying close attention to how your body feels in the workouts after your recovery session. So I'm a big believer in the recovery as far as compression boots and compression socks for recovery, in addition to either a massage or we use in our clinic these tools called A-stem tools. It's a method of breaking up adhesions that may eventually cause injuries. So that's another thing that we'll do to help prevent injury.
Perfect. So let's move on to recovering from injury. If you are unlucky and you do get injured, what are the things that you should do? How do you go about that recovery process?
Well, the first step after you get hurt is not waiting too long to get in to see someone. That's the first step. A lot of athletes will try to work around it, look up stuff on Google or internet, which is quite normal. But waiting to get in just delays your time to recovery. And so getting in means, what I mean by that is getting in with a physiotherapist or a physician that understands your sport, that will obviously listen to you and what your training is like, and get an assessment, a proper assessment of what is happening, not only the injury itself, so the symptoms that you're having, but also the cause is really critical. There's a lot of different ways to treat the symptoms, but understanding the cause is the most important in the comeback to your sport.
So this, I feel, is a really important question. Who should you actually go and see? Is it your physiotherapist, your physician, your chiropractor, a massage therapist? And does the answer depend on your injury and your situation overall?
Well, I'm certainly biased as a physio, but the most important thing is someone that has a good experience in the sport, in cycling, running, triathlon, understanding the biomechanics of the movements. So that's the most important. And that could be a chiropractor, that could be a physio, that could be an MD that understands that. But any one of those three, and getting a proper diagnosis is important. And the diagnosis it may mean, for instance, in your case, you may have a patellofemoral syndrome. That's fine. That's your diagnosis. But then why do you have that? And then so the next phase of that is the biomechanical assessment and taking a good history with you. And so that requires experience in working with athletes to take a proper history and to understand the mechanics of the sport. And in our case, we will do video. We'll do pressure analysis. For running, we may work with a couple different bike fitters and take a look at the person or the athlete on the bike. We can see what's happening in order so we can figure out the real cause of the pain of the injury, so we can fix it, and we don't just treat symptoms and then see you again in 3 months with the same injury again. So when you're looking for someone to go to see, it's best to ask around, ask the clubs, ask who does everybody go to. Usually there is, in most areas, there's kind of a go-to guy or gal that works with the triathlon clubs, cycling teams. In most communities, there tends to be kind of a go-to clinic or person. And then go check out the facility. What does it look like? Does it look like a facility that treats athletes? And then once you see them, certainly you're not fully committed to that facility. If it doesn't feel right to you, if you feel rushed, if you feel they're not listening, if you feel like they don't understand your sport, then try somewhere else. But it's most important that you get to a place that will listen and understand, has a good understanding of your sport.
I'm totally agreeing with you about that. The expert having the specific background or knowing how to treat athletes in your sport or in endurance sports being the most important thing, and not the title. And just to share a bit of my history with my injury, because it's I got it for the first time 3 years ago, and then I saw 2 physios and wasn't happy with either one of them really, and then an orthopedist, so an MD, and then a third physio. And that third physio was the first one that really inspired confidence in me, that she knew what she was doing. So I kept seeing her, and we eventually got me back to health. And now that was back in Helsinki. Now I'm in Lisbon. So now currently my support team consists of a chiropractor and a massage therapist. But I'm very positive about it. And so now I don't have a physio. So it's not, the title is less relevant, I would say, than, as you said, having that experience in treating athletes, and that person inspires confidence in you that they can take care of you.
Yes, I agree.
So when you have had you find your support team, they will obviously set you up with a plan, but what are some general tips for recovering from injury, some basic knowledge that everybody should know?
Well, usually, it obviously depends on, certainly there's a dependent upon your injury and on the individual, but in general, there's always a process of healing. And so listening to your clinician is really important, because the healing process varies between what tissue is injured, whether that's tendon or joint or muscle. And so respecting that healing process is really important. So listening to the clinician on what the treatment is and how much time you need to take off. In some injuries, you have to take time off. In other injuries, you're able to work around them and continue some light training. The nice thing about triathlon is that you can usually focus on one of the other of the three disciplines while you're recovering. And in other sports, that's not always the case. So that's one of the beauties of triathlon, is that you can usually have one of the three you can typically do at least while you're injured. As you respect that healing process and you're getting treatment, that your clinician should slowly get you back into your normal training program. And if you have a coach, it's really important that clinician works with the coach and they're willing to work together in developing that return to sport plan. If you don't have a coach, then it's the clinician's job then to communicate with you on a return to sport plan. And that should be a gradual plan with the injury in mind. And what I mean by that is how much you're loading that joint or that tendon or that muscle. And that load should be gradual and increased over time, and then also should mimic the demands of the sport. So in some case, if you're running, of course, and you have a patellar tendon injury, we have to get that tendon able to load again properly under high force. So that means at some stage in your program, you're going to be doing some plyometric training, some little bit of jumping training to get it prepared and ready and strong for running. And that's important so that you don't come back in again for the same injury. But that's gradual over time.
Yeah. Can you give an example of how different injuries may require different, how different injuries you might be able to train through and some you need complete rest off? What are some of those kinds of injuries?
Sure. So one example that you can train through is plantar fasciitis. I mean, it is a pretty common injury, but you can't really do a lot more damage by training. It may not heal as fast as we're doing the treatment. It may not heal as fast, but you can continue to train through that. An injury that you can't train through would be a stress fracture. A stress fracture for running, you cannot train through. I mean, certainly you could continue to ride the bike, you could swim, but you can't run. In some cases, there are some athletes that maybe have a hip impingement. And when it's pretty acute and painful, you can't run or ride a bike. You'd be limited just to swimming until the impingement improves. So those are just a few examples.
And what are some examples of timelines for getting back to for the gradual building up of your training when you return from injury? What does it depend on? And if you can give a few examples, again, as that's going to be very individual.
Yeah, well, one of the more important thing is listening to your body and not having pain. So as you progress in your rehab, the strengthening program and loading program, as you're progressing through that, if you have pain, you're certainly not ready to return. And that's one of the major guidelines is pain with loading or pain with activity that mimics your sport. The second part of that is when we find certain limitations, let's say hip impingement again, right side versus the left side, we see that the right hip is restricted by 20, 30 degrees of hip flexion or internal rotation, of hip mobility. We want that hip to move like the other hip does. And so that we may hold you back until that both are moving to the same degree. That's important so that we don't send you back and then you start having symptoms again right away. So that might be a more specific example.
What about, let's shift gears a little bit here, because you do a lot of work on core training as well. So if you can give some general advice related to core training for triathletes, what would that be?
We look at it in a couple different ways. So the first way is prevention, and prevention core strengthening is what we discussed a bit earlier, which is multiplanar, doing strengthening exercises that require core strengthening exercises that require you to rotate or move laterally. For example, the Russian twist on the ball, shoulders are on the ball, feet are on the ground, and you're twisting your upper body left and right. That would be a rotation exercise. Lateral exercise might be side step or monster walk with a band at your ankles, and you're walking sideways and engaging your gluteus medius, your lateral hip muscles. And that would be those are examples of maybe some multiplanar prevention exercises. And then the second piece of it is more specific to performance and specific to the sport's demand on the prime movers of the sport. So example would be just your calf, your gastroc, and your soleus, which ties into your Achilles. So strengthening the Achilles and the gastroc soleus muscle eccentrically, the way that muscle works when you're running, can provide a level of injury prevention, but also can assist with some injury sports performance as well. And you can do that while engaging your core, certainly at the same time. And when we say core, we don't mean abdominals. That's not the only only muscles that make up your core. It means your back, your scapular muscles. It means your glutes, your hip muscles. All that is your core. And that it has to be strong to help stabilize in, for instance, running and cycling, your lower extremities. So anything that we do, we're trying to either prevent injury in the multiplanar, or we're trying to improve performance or improve the strength of the prime movers, the muscles that create all the force and work, by strengthening them specifically.
Do you have a recommendation for any resource on core training if people want to, for example, find some program or read more about it? Is there a book or anything that you would recommend?
Well, I'm a big fan of Joe Friel, and he had just has come out again with the Triathletes Training Bible, and I think there's some really good stuff in there, and that can give the triathletes some good basic ideas of strengthening for the sport. So that would be probably the first reference I can think of. If you're just looking to get started with something, that would be a good source.
Yeah, good one. Let's take a few quick questions, like your 2-sentence answers or so on a few different modalities, and we've touched on a few of them already, but a few of them not so much. So just very quickly on each of them, what are your thoughts on stretching, including static and dynamic stretching?
There's a place for both. Both are important. Dynamic before activity, static after activity. And we all, as we get older, we all need a lot more of both.
What about foam rolling?
It's important for recovery, for sure. And done correctly, it can help prevent injury and also help you get the most out of your workouts.
And massages?
Same as the foam rolling. It's just more expensive and it requires an appointment. So foam rolling is a bit easier, but massage would do the exact same thing as foam rolling.
And acupuncture?
I'm certainly not an expert in acupuncture at all, but we do dry needling in our physiotherapy clinics, and I'm a huge proponent of the dry needling piece of that. So for recovery, but also to get a little bit deeper than massage or foam rolling can do.
And you mentioned already ASTIM and Greston, I believe, would be a similar device or method, unless I'm completely mistaken.
No, they're similar. ASTIM is a bit more. There's a bit more research around the ASTIM tools in that company than there is with Graston, but it's a similar principle of increasing blood flow, increasing the body's natural healing response. We use it in a prevention way to look for potential injuries that could crop up. So we have some triathletes and professional cyclists that use it purely for prevention, much like they would use a massage.
And taping.
Kinesiotaping, we use it. There is some blood flow changes, although we don't really know how much really. We use it more for injury related to help muscles fire a bit better, to take some pressure off maybe the glenohumeral joint, your shoulder joint, or your patellofemoral joint in your knee.
And orthotics.
It really depends with orthotics. In cycling, it's really easy in cycling to say that most people are going to get a benefit out of it. There's this probably in our experience a 99% success rate in cycling with orthotics because the shoes don't provide a lot of support. In running, it's very dependent, and we're very cautious in using them. We probably use in runners maybe be 25 to 33% of the time we're using it with runners, but in general, we're trying to get them stronger. And if we can't get them strong enough to support their lower extremity in running, and they have these foot and ankle faults that we see during the run gait analysis, then we will use them.
That's very interesting. I had no idea that that was going to be your answer, specifically about the cyclist success rate. So let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions that are more general, not related to injury prevention per se or recovery. But again, take just a very brief moment to answer these, starting with, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or your field of expertise?
My favorite resource is a few guys that I rely on. I know I don't know everything, so I rely on Joe Friel, Jonathan Hall, Bobby McGee. Those are three guys that are really experienced coaches that have taught me a lot about triathlon and sport.
And what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
My favorite piece is my Trek Top Fuel mountain bike, and then my Normatec recovery boots.
And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Listening and learning, really listening to people, listening to athletes, listening to those guys I mentioned before, Joe Friel and Jono and Bobby. I mean, recognizing that there are people smarter than me, listening to them, having good conversations with them about sport, and paying attention to the research.
Brilliant. So if people want to find out more about you, your website is endurancerehab.com. And you're also on Twitter at Endurance Rehab, and you have a Facebook page that people can probably find by just searching Endurance Rehab. Is
Correct.
there anything else that you want to mention? Where do you have? You can mention where you have your clinics and for which people they might be able to visit you locally.
Sure. Yeah, we're in Arizona. We're in Scottsdale, Phoenix, and Mesa, Arizona. We have 3 clinics. And our website is the best way to get a hold of us, or on Facebook, either one. My email address is Nate, N-A-T-E, at endurancerehab.com. Happy to answer any questions and direct people in the right way.
Brilliant. Yeah. And you also have a lot of great articles on different magazines like Lava and the Triathlete magazine that people can search for. I read quite a few of them and before when researching this interview. So those are really, really good for people who want to learn a bit more. Well, Nate, this has been very, very helpful. And I hope that people can follow the injury prevention advice more than the recovery advice, but it's good to get both of them in here.
Agree. Especially you. We especially want you to follow that advice. Get your knee better and then start preventing these injuries instead of dealing with them.
Yeah, but I definitely, I'm in the same boat as you, that I rely on having people that know a lot around me and having a good support team, and realizing that I don't know a lot about this, so I should trust experts. So that's why I have not one but several that I trust around me to help me with it. Yeah,
very good.
But that's about it for this interview. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you very much. Take care.
Hope that you found that interview useful. I have a few key takeaways as usual. And the first one of this is that in terms of injury prevention, doing that yearly checkup, that is definitely the big one that I think that a lot of people probably don't do. So make sure that you do that. That's something that I've done, actually. So I'm also agreeing from my own personal experience. Although at this point it didn't help me, unfortunately, because I'm still injured at the moment. But I definitely hope to get back soon. The other injury prevention factors that you need to be very diligent with is the warm-up, that multiplanar core training, and doing some stretching, and obviously sleep that we have talked about many times, but all of those are super important. The second point is that if you do get injured, then don't wait to find the experts. Seek out the experts that can help you get back to recovery. Do it as soon as possible. So that's just it. Don't try to hope that things clear up. It's better to do maybe an unnecessary appointment than to wait and hope that things go away and then they don't. Actually, go and seek out those experts. That's what they're here for. And finally, when you want to find that expert to have in your support team, whether it's for prevention or for recovery, ask around to find who's the local go-to guy. Ask the endurance athletes in your community, at local clubs, etc. And you can find what the recommendations that people go to, whether it's a physiotherapist, a medical doctor, a chiropractor, whatever it is. Find that go-to guy, and that will be a good place to start at least, and see if that's somebody who works well with you. As usual, you can find the show notes for today's episode on thattriathlonshow.com. Remember that if you have questions or comments, you can leave them on that show notes page, and I get back to you very quickly when you post those comments there. And the next episode will be out on Monday as usual. And in that, we'll discuss bike maintenance and care. It's with Jimmy Sears, who's one of the co-founders of Ventum, but he's one of the best bike mechanics in the world, I dare say. It's a super practical and highly useful episode that basically covers the bike maintenance and cleaning 101 that will save you a lot and lots of headache and money if you do these things, like do the little and often, just like we talked about today with the prevention stuff. You can do that for your bike as well, and it will be so beneficial in the long run. And you'll learn all about it from the ground up next Monday. Finally, I want to mention that if you've been wanting to take your triathlon to the next level and really get the most out of your training, you now have a great opportunity to do so, because one slot just opened up for individual coaching by myself. And as you know, I only coach 15 athletes at a time. That is by design, because I really want to have the time to focus a lot on each athlete. And I know that a lot of full-time coaches, they will have at least twice that number of athletes. But I've decided to minimize that. Not minimize, but keep it at a low level to allow me the time to really pay all the attention that I think each athlete deserves. And one of those 15 slots is opening up since one of my guys, he is working in the military and he will start training for deployment, which means he'll have to stop training for triathlon for the time being, which means that you now have the opportunity to grab that slot for yourself. And you can learn more about how my coaching works on scientifictriathlon.com/coaching. And I'll also link to that in the episode description. Or you can just send me an email to michael@scientifictriathlon.com. That's Michael with a K. And we can see if coaching is right for you. We can schedule a Skype call or a Google Hangout or whatever you want. And and talk it through and see if this is a good fit for both of us. So again, if you are interested in coaching, be sure to reach out and learn more. And it's no obligations, of course. We can discuss things through first thoroughly, and you'll learn if and how it can benefit you. And I also want, of course, to take the opportunity to thank Mike, who is the athlete whose slot is opening up now. I want to thank you a lot, Mike. I know you'll be listening to this, and it's been a real pleasure coaching you, and I really look forward to getting going again in the autumn when your deployment is done and dusted. Finally, let's thank our amazing sponsors that keep the show going. First, we have Triathlon Corner, which is the online home of shopping the best triathlon products in the world to great prices. The brands that they have include Garmin, Stages Power, Café du Cycliste, Zip, Mako, Zone Free, Hoka One One, and they ship worldwide. And of course, you can get 10% off your next purchase when you use the discount code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, all caps, on triathlon-corner.store. And thank you to Precision Hydration for sponsoring this episode. Remember that if you want to get your electrolyte strategy tailored for you specifically and your sweat rate and sweat sodium content, you should go ahead and take their free online sweat test on precisionhydration.com, and that will give you the exact strategy that you should use in your training and racing. And of course, as you go ahead and purchase any electrolyte products, you will get the first one for free when you use the code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, all caps. Alright, thank you as always for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.